All right, so this presentation is recording, and if you have to get off, or if I say something and you want to go back and check it out again, this presentation will be posted to the Marine Resources Council website sometime by next week, end of next week at the latest. Okay, all righty. Give me 1 second, just pulling it up. Okay. All right, awesome. So this is the Rockledge Gardens is hosting the MRC's webinar, Mighty Mangroves, and my name is Nicole Burkay, and I'm the Environmental Education Coordinator at the Marine Resources Council. Before we get started, a little bit about myself. I moved to Florida last year after finishing my master's in fisheries and aquaculture at Texas A&M Corpus Christi, and before that I served for 2 years in the Philippines as a coastal resource management volunteer. So mangroves are awesome, I love them, but I wouldn't claim that I am a tried and true mangrove expert. So I do have a question for you all, and so you should be able to see this poll right now, and please vote to let me know how much you guys know about mangroves. So not much, a little, a fair amount, a lot, and I am an expert. So if you are an expert, hopefully I don't mess up on anything. Okay, all right, so I'm gonna end the poll and you should be able to see it. So we do have, a lot of you do know a fair amount about mangroves. So hopefully I'll be able to share some new information, either about mangroves or how to start your own mangrove nursery. Okay. All right, so as I mentioned, I do work at the Marine Resources Council, and we are a nonprofit located down in Palm Bay in that big blue building. We are dedicated to protecting and restoring the Indian River Lagoon through science, restoration, and education. And so mangroves really tie into all three of our tiers. You know, we use them for science, we do science research on them, we work with restoration and restoring shorelines, and right now we're doing education with them. So, since you all know a fair amount about mangroves already, I'll go through this pretty quickly. So what is a mangrove? It's a salt-tolerant tree or shrub known as a halophyte, and it can grow into completely fresh water or even into hypersaline waters. If there's like a super salty lagoon or an area there, it gets a lot of tidal flooding and it dries out and it leaves the salt behind, the mangroves can still grow there depending on what species it is. And mangroves are super cool because they're resilient to an abundance of environmental stressors. They have to deal with freshwater outflows, tidal flooding, salt accumulation, and typically, even though in this picture you see this mangrove on a beautiful sandy beach, they typically grow in highly organic and oxygen deficient soils, kind of like that mud, silty stuff where all the bacteria is breaking down the leaf litter and turning it into detritus. So mangroves are found all over the world, but only in tropical and subtropical areas. And there are approximately 80 species worldwide. And species meaning that there's not always a lot of true mangroves. Technically, there's only well, depending on who you ask, there's about 47 true species of mangroves. And to make it a true species of mangrove, it is only found in mangrove communities. It's going to have a major role in that community. It has to have specialized adaptations to survive in its environment, and it must have some kind of salt exclusion method. So that blue triangle that just popped up is the biodiversity triangle. It's a hot spot. You're going to have a huge amount of different kinds of species, anywhere from invertebrates all the way up to complex macro marine organisms. You can see that the Philippines is dead center in it. And so I was trying to learn about 40 different types of mangroves, trying to get familiar with all of them, where they are found, what their names are. So it's been kind of nice being here in Florida, where we only have 3 true mangrove species. And mangroves are found in 118 countries. And in Florida, you can find them about North Cedar Key on the Gulf Coast, and then all the way down around to Cape Canaveral on the Atlantic coast. However, they are spreading north due to global warming and different kind of environmental issues that have caused them to move into newly opened niche areas. Okay. However, even though the mangroves are moving north in some areas and spreading in some areas, we are experiencing major mangrove declines. Since the 1940s, more than 86% of the mangroves have been lost in Florida. And depending again who you ask and what kind of regulations are in place, there's estimates, monitoring in place. There's estimates of about 50% of mangroves lost worldwide. And these things are due to expanding human population and development, impoundments for mosquito control, so preventing the mangroves from expanding from their set area, hydraulic changes, if there's been dikes, if a freshwater stream has been diverted, or if a barrier island has been moved and now there's a huge, a bunch of marine water coming in. Of invasive species such as Brazilian pepper or Australian pine, different aquaculture operations, especially shrimp or fish operations in developing nations, and salt aquaculture ponds. And then I don't know how much this typically happens here in the United States, perhaps with people camping, but there is a decent amount of illegal harvesting of timber of the mangrove forest for fuel wood and charcoal in developing nations. So the mangroves of Florida, you can see that we have the buttonwood right there, which I messed up on my animation. So we have our red mangrove, oh no, and we have our black, and we will have our white mangrove, and we have our buttonwood. And so I'll show you pictures of all those different kinds of mangroves throughout this presentation, with the exception of the buttonwood. Since the buttonwood is not actually a true mangrove species, we're not going to talk about it today. We're just going to focus on the red, black, and white mangroves. One of the coolest things about the mangroves, and the reason why they are also different than the mangrove associated species, is that they have special seeds / propagules. So a regular plant is going to have its seed be fertilized, and then it's going to fall to the ground or be carried off by a different bird or animal, and then it's going to eventually germinate when conditions are right and grow into a whole plant. Whereas the mangrove is going to actually germinate on the tree, and it'll actually be a full plant. Well, not like a full plant, but it'll be like a ready to go, boxed plant ready when it drops into the water. So you can see the comparison of the germinating plant on the left and then the propagule on the right. Okay, so mangroves are really interesting as well because they can have pretty distinct zonations. This does change if your shorelines are very thin versus if your shorelines are very wide. So in in Florida, our 3 mangroves are pretty decently zoned. We have our red mangroves, which are going to be considered our frontliners. We're going to have our black mangroves, which are going to be kind of in the middle. And then we're going to have our white mangroves, which are going to be the most landward mangroves. So this is a picture of our red mangrove. And as I mentioned, it is a frontliner, which is interesting because in the Philippines, it's actually considered more of a weaker mangrove. And they have a lot of different other species of mangroves that are considered their frontliners there. They're going to be more bushy and shrubby-like ones, and they can handle the greater storm surges in comparison to the red mangrove. I like to identify it by its waxy leaves, which you can see reflecting in the picture, as well as its prop roots. And the red mangrove is known as the walking mangrove because its prop roots will continue kind of growing out and out to increase the stabilization and to, if it needs to move where it needs to go. And you can see that there are like some barnacles and encrusting organisms on the prop roots. So the prop roots provide a lot of habitat for different organisms. And they flower year round. All right, so here's a close-up of the leaves. You can see that they are pointed, kind of like an oblong diamond shape, a little bit lighter on the underside, a little bit deeper green on the top side. And there are the prop roots, which really help with stabilization and making the mangrove strong. So here are the flowers. As I mentioned, they do flower all year round. We have the propagule that is developing on the parent plant still. And that's kind of almost like the fruit of it, where it's going to be stretching out. And the red mangrove is going to be hermaphroditic, and it can self-pollinate as well as be pollinated by the wind. Here is the mangrove propagule. Once it detaches from the parent plant, it will float in the water for anywhere for about 30 days or so, all the way up into 365 days. And it'll initially start kind of floating horizontal. And then as it's kind of done, I think it's about 40 days of like fully kind of finishing up its development that it needs to, it will start to tilt vertical, and you'll actually see mangroves floating horizontally and vertically in the water. Once it has reached a shoreline, and it'll start to sprout like little baby roots, and that will kind of help get it established and start to help tip it up and get it buried into the sand or the shoreline. And then once it'll sprout its roots, and then it will start sprouting its leaves and increasing its stem length. Oh, there we go. And then there's our baby mangrove. And you can start to see a little bit of the prop roots already starting to grow, even though this is a smaller mangrove. Another way to identify this mangrove is by this kind of nodule right here. That can help if you don't see any of the prop roots yet. You may be able to see the difference in the coloring of the stem. This is the original propagule right here, and then this is the woody development. So the black mangrove is in between the red and the white for the most part. It's highly salt tolerant. You'll find it kind of more in like the dip in between the reds and the blacks. And the reason why it is able to be so salt tolerant is that it has these things called nematophores, and the nematophores help it breathe through very like compacted soils. It helps aerate the soils. And additionally, those thinner leaves with the lighter undersides are going to have salt excretion glands on them. And this plant will flower in early spring and, spring and early summer. And that arrow down at the bottom is showing you the nematophores, the little sticks that are attached by a connecting root system, and then you'll see the little sticks all through, and they can actually spread out very far. Okay. So here is a close-up of the nematophores, and they truly do act kind of like a snorkel. They help give them more air in very anoxic soils, very dense soils. Then here is a close-up of the leaves, where you can see a little bit better that that is the light underside of the leaf, very, very thin. And then you can even see a little bit of the salt being pushed out of the surface of the leaf. And this is a great close-up where you can truly see the salt crystals. And some people say that you can lick them. I personally wouldn't. You don't know what is actually on that tree, if it's been treated with anything, or what's been going around. Maybe an animal came by, and it's probably not a good idea to lick the leaves. Okay. And so these are black mangrove flowers. And once the propagules start to develop from the flowers, they'll be kind of on the smaller side, about ½ an inch or so, maybe closer to an inch, depending on if you get a really big one. And I always like to describe them as kind of looking like lima beans. They're going to have that outer casing on it and the shape that is going to be very similar to a lima bean. And they will float around for definitely not as long as the red mangrove. I want to say that they can survive for about 140 days in the water. And then they need a significantly smaller amount of time in the water before they're ready to settle out onto the sand or onto the shoreline. And they'll kind of start getting like this tail that comes out of the propagule. And it'll start growing out first. Once it has expanded enough, the leaves will start to unfurl from the, I believe it's called a pericycle. And you can see that there is a little bit of roots developing right here on the tip of the propagule, and so it'll expand out. And at this point, this is when the propagule will start to kind of raise up and start to become more established on its own. So you can see that that is the original covering of the propagule, and that was the little tail that comes out first. And you can already start to see that silvery underside of the black mangrove. So we have our white mangrove, and they are going to be at or above mean high water. And so they're going to be more inland. And they are going to be the least cold tolerant. So you might find them in up north. You know, they're going to be one of the last ones that are going to come in because they are going to die off quicker due to the cold. However, they are the most salt tolerant. Because they are living above the mean high water line, they can get a lot of that tidal influx if there's a big storm event or a hurricane, and all that salt isn't going to go anywhere once the water recedes. It's just going to seep into the soils. So they can handle super saline soils. A great example is typical ocean water. Like if you're going out swimming, you know, in Satellite Beach, it's going to be about 30 to maybe 35, maybe 37 parts per thousand. So it just shows you how much the white mangrove can handle. And they don't have any visible aerial roots. They're going to look more like a regular tree. However, they may develop peg roots in very poorly oxygenated soils. So the peg roots would kind of come up almost kind of like cypress trees, but a little bit smaller. And for me, the easiest way to identify the white mangrove is going to be with the rounded leaves with the small dip. And they also excrete salt through their leaves. So you can see a little dip on the picture right there. And then I will also show you a close-up of the knob on the leaf stalk because it is a little bit difficult to see in that picture. And these mangroves will flower in spring and early summer. So you can see the flowers. So here is the close-up. You can really see the dips in the leaves. I think it kind of looks like an M or an upside down W, so like white mangrove. And those are the little knobs on the tip of the leaf stem, and those are called nectaries. And they produce kind of like a sugary substance that is theorized to attract ants, which are then doing a symbiotic relationship with the mangrove and eating other insects or pests. However, this hasn't been proven. And so it's a lot of theory and ideas about that. It's also, this mangrove is also known as the Frankenstein mangrove by some people because the two little knobs look like Frankenstein's little bolts in his neck. And this is also a popular mangrove to make honey out of, and it does attract a lot of different pollinators and butterflies. Okay, so here's the process of the mangrove, the white mangrove developing its propagules. And you can see that they look a lot different in comparison to the reds. They look a little bit similar to the blacks because they are, you know, similar in color and relatively in shape. But they do, to me, look a little bit more like green almonds when they're on the tree and when they have first fallen off of the tree. After some time, they'll float in the water and then the outside covering will turn brown. And so this is a slowly developing propagule. And they are the most delicate. They have the highest mortality as a propagule as well as a tree. And so you can see that the stem is starting to come out and we got some small root system developing. And then we have the top, the covering of the propagule kind of coming off as well. And there is our developed mangrove, and you can already start to see the little dip in the white mangrove leaf. So now that we are very familiar with all the different mangrove species, I just wanted to draw some attention to how much of a super plant the mangroves are. They provide an abundance of ecosystem services. They help with storm surges and coastal erosion and protect from storms. They provide huge amounts of habitat for all levels of life forms and different organisms, and they kind of almost form the base of a lot of different food chains by starting off with the detritus or the decomposing leaf matter and then going up from there. They also provide a lot of income for shoreline communities in developing nations, as well as in our nation for tourism through either just paddling and around in kayaks and paddleboards or fishing, wildlife watching. And then they also help with preserving water quality through filtering pollutions and different nutrients. And they're huge carbon sinks. They're way more efficient than your traditional tree forests to absorb carbon. And they also protect seagrass beds and coral reefs by kind of slowing down any kind of pollution that's on the land going into the ocean. You might notice that I did not mention the source of managed timber for building and other uses because we do not want to be cutting down our mangrove trees. But even though mangroves provide so many different services for us, they live on a battleground. This green line represents the mangrove forests that we have. We obviously have our ocean on one side, and we have our humans on the other. They are the front lines against storm protection, protecting the humans and our livelihoods on the land. So if there's a big storm, they're going to be there to kind of protect everything. And they are the last line in stormwater defense, so protecting our marine and aquatic ecosystems by helping prevent pollution and excess nutrients from entering our more delicate environments. But they are getting pushed really hard from rising sea level and different kinds of climate change, and they're getting really pushed hard from the humans in regards to development and land use and changing of our waterways and things like that. And the biggest thing we are doing is the development. More than 60% of Brevard County shorelines are hardened, meaning that mangroves can't be really established well in front of them. You can see that this picture on the top left, yes, there are some mangroves there, but they are very large and strong mangroves. You can't imagine that a little propagule is going to survive or get established in that area, especially in front of that seawall. We also have a lot of stormwater pollution. We don't have our natural land habitats that are capturing a lot of the stormwater that is going into our natural system that can remove those toxins before they go into our marine environment. So we've changed a lot of things. We need to help them with our restoration efforts. At the Marine Resources Council, we have over 500 mangroves on our initial property, and we also have even more mangroves at our nursery down in Sebastian. We used to have monthly workshops before COVID, but now we are we're thinking about starting them again. Not sure yet, so stay tuned, check out our website. However, we have done some plantings already. We planted almost a mile of shoreline in 2018, and we have more planned in the future. And so if you are a homeowner where you have, I think, 100 yards of shoreline that you're looking to be restored, definitely contact us to see if you qualify for a mangrove planting. So, growing your mangroves at home. All right, so I want to talk about collecting mangrove propagules on your own and how to establish your own mangrove nursery here. So as I mentioned, when a red mangrove propagule first falls off, it's going to float horizontally through the water until it eventually gets to tip up and move vertical, and it'll settle out on the shoreline. For both of these mangrove propagules, we ask that you please do not pick them up as they are, still viable in their natural environment, and we want to make sure that we're not over collecting our propagules for natural recruitment. So the propagules that we do want you to collect, if you do see them out there, are going to be your regular propagules that you see right there. A lot of people call them like sea pencils or sea pens. And you know, they're going to be that oblong shaped. When you're looking at them, you do not see any kind of small little roots coming out. Those ones are totally fine to collect. You want to make sure that when you're collecting them, they're not too squishy, or if there's like chunks missing out of them, if you want to have the most viable propagules. On this picture on the right, those are kind of like the little finger-like projections that I'm talking about. That if you see a mangrove propagule on a shoreline and it has those, please do not remove it. We only want the propagules that have not already sprouted roots. The sprouted roots indicate that the propagule is doing well, so we want to make sure that we're not infringing on the natural recruitment. Okay. So this is how we would set up our mini mangrove system. On the left-hand picture, you can see that we have a mangrove propagule in a simple bottle of water. We repurpose the plastic bottle. These mangroves do not need salt water right in the beginning. You can just grow them straight in fresh water the entire time. And then once they start to sprout those little finger-like projections, anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks, they are now ready to be introduced into soil. And you can use them in a lot of different ways. You can see in the middle picture, we have mangrove propagules in toilet paper rolls with a little bit of soil, or you can pot them into actual pots. It's totally up to you. This picture right here on the right shows a mangrove propagule that is completely sprouted and that is really ready for a true mangrove pot. You want to put your mangrove into anywhere from a 3 to 4 quart, or maybe a gallon or 3-gallon pot. And you can put multiple propagules into the same pot. They tend to do a little bit better. I would say 2 to 3 red mangrove propagules to a pot. Sometimes one does just fine as well. And you want to put maybe about 1 inch or 2 of mulch, just enough to cover the holes in the pot. Then you want to add soil. It doesn't have to be a mixture of sand and soil. It can be, but if sand is difficult for you to get to, regular soil works just fine. So you'll put your soil in, and then you'll add your mangrove propagule, and then you'll add more soil and give it a good pat, and then give it a nice long drink. These mangroves definitely like a lot of water. As you can see that we have our mangroves in kind of like these trough structures. On the right-hand side, you can see that we have kind of like wooden troughs. On the left, we have dugout troughs with pond liner. Also in the picture in the back right, you can see that we have a bunch of mangrove propagules in just regular kiddie pools. They're not as the most aesthetically pleasing, but you do need to keep them moist. This is another way you can just have an entire rows of mangrove propagules, and you can just water them regularly over time. Okay. So we'll go through our black and our whites kind of on the quicker side, so that just in case if there's any questions. These ones right here are indeed our black mangrove propagules. And you can see that they don't really have any like stems coming off of them. They're got a very lima bean-esque look to them. And these ones needed kind of a different method to be sprouted. So you can see in the center picture, we have a metal tub, just like those regular like lasagna trays. And you're kind of making mangrove lasagna. So you want to put down a layer of paper towel, spritz it lightly with some water, put a layer of your mangrove propagules, put down another paper towel, spritz it with water, and then just keep on building it. And then we recommend that you wrap it with saran wrap to protect it against introducing any kind of like mold or anything gross into your tray. And you don't need to put it into direct sunlight, just kind of like near a window would work. You can even keep it outside. It's up to you. We just ask that you check it every couple of days to see if there's any molding ones or if you need to spritz your paper towels again. So once they have sprouted their root system a little bit more, kind of like those two middle pictures, or excuse me, the two middle propagules in this last picture here, then they are ready to be put into the soil. And this is kind of like a better picture on the far right. You can really see that it's started to sprout its root system. It's got this extended stem. And so there's two options with these guys. You can either put them in another baking tray, just put down soil, make sure that you're burying the stem and you're not burying the leaves or any kind of like main part of the root system, or excuse me, the stems. You just want to make sure that you're getting your roots in there. And so they do kind of fall over a little bit, but that's okay. They'll kind of right themselves over time. And then on the right-hand side, you can still see that we have a little bit of outer casing still on the mangrove. And you can also see that it was actually potted in like a little paper towel roll first. So that's another option. Instead of putting a bunch of black mangroves into one tray, you can keep them in smaller little groups, either with seed trays or using creative methods such as like paper towel rolls. So for the white mangrove, very similar process as the black mangrove. You can see that these propagules are still green and light colored. Those ones we recommend do not collect. You want to wait until you see them the kind of like brown. They have that harder casing on them. They might start to have a little bit of a stem protruding from the main shell casing. Those ones we recommend, those are okay to collect. Very similar process. You want to build your mangrove lasagna trays, paper towels, propagules, paper towels, propagules, making sure that you're keeping things nice and moist. And then you want to keep them, give them a little bit of sunlight, but not too much. You don't want to dry it out, as these propagules, the whites and the blacks, can become desiccated rather easily. And if they become desiccated, then they're going to die. And so there's a nice close-up of all of our white mangrove propagules. You can see that they develop a similar root structure like the black mangrove propagules, with kind of that stem protruding out and then like a little root system going. And those are kind of like the seed trays that I were talking, like the seedling trays, like the little mini trays. And just a little bit of soil. Make sure that you're getting that root system down, but you don't want to bury the stem too much, and you definitely want to keep the leaves exposed. Keep a good eye on them for watering them, and especially with the blacks and the whites, they can be a little sensitive to direct sunlight. So you either want to keep them in like maybe like a more shady spot or underneath a tree. They need to get a little bit of sunlight, but not too much. Typically, a lot of these propagules will develop under larger trees, so they're being shaded by a natural canopy. So we recommend that you try to mimic it a little bit. A couple of care tips for our potted mangroves. Like I said, they need regular watering, and you know this can get expensive. So we recommend getting a rain barrel as a super cheap and easy way to keep watering your mangroves. You can see that this is our mangrove nursery, and we have our rain barrel system in the back where it says Heart Our Lagoon. So we collect all that water, and we use that water to water our mangroves and take care of them. As I mentioned, smaller plants may need more shade. Those palm trees along our property actually really help out our baby mangroves. You also need to do regular weeding because the soil is kept pretty moist, and you're putting in a lot of effort into, you know, taking care of your mangrove, making sure it's getting proper lighting. You are going to have to contend with weeds and grasses. So about weekly weeding we recommend. And then you'll also have to up pot. Some people say that mangroves grow pretty slowly. I think they grow pretty quickly, at least in the first year or two. And you'll know when your mangrove's ready to be up potted once roots start coming out the bottom of your pot. And then you do the same process, having a little bit of mulch in the bottom of your larger pot, soil, mangrove, soil, and then just keeping things really nice and moist. The blacks and the white mangroves definitely don't need as much water as your red mangroves. So you may need to keep an eye on that and see how much sun and evaporation your area gets. So if you either purchase mangroves from Rockledge Gardens or the Marine Resources Councils, or you have grown up your mangrove to the point that it's ready to be potted, it's important to know where to plant. So the first question is your shoreline a good site for mangroves? Does it have past mangrove presence? Did you just lose all your mangroves because of a hurricane, or was there previous development where mangroves were lost? That might be a great location for mangroves to be added if the environmental stressors are back to normal or aren't extreme. You also need to make sure that it's a low energy location. So if you're on the front side of our barrier island, beach side, that's not a great spot to plant mangroves. They're not naturally there. With the heavy wave action, it's going to wash out your mangrove. Even some parts of the Indian River Lagoon can be difficult to plant mangroves on, depending on if it's just going to have a completely open face to a lot of wave action, if it's a high wake zone from boats. So it's definitely important to know what your wave energy is in your area. Also, your water flow and hydrology. Is there a lot of freshwater outflow there that might have a lot of things that could damage your mangrove, or is there not any freshwater inflow? So that might be something to consider as well. We also recommend to not plant your mangrove in front of a seawall due to that heavy energy from the waves hitting the seawall, unless you have a special like extender out that you can put in front of your seawall and then plant the mangrove on top of that. But that's going to take a lot of different kinds of permitting that you'll have to talk to different governmental organizations about your permitting process. And so if you satisfy all those requirements, we also recommend that you plant your mangrove above the average high tide line. If you're planting lower than that, then you need to get a permit. And if you plant too close to your regular tidal inflows, it can wash out smaller mangroves if they're not super established, or if a big storm comes by after you just spent hundreds of dollars on mangroves. You want to make sure that your mangroves are going to recruit to your area. And they can also be used as an aquatic landscape feature, maybe. But please do not plant your mangroves in any stormwater retention ponds or canals. You know, we always want to make sure we're planting in our property only or your property only. So you don't want any kind of mangroves clogging up your stormwater retention ponds or any of kinds of like drainage canals. So we are kind of running out of time. So I'll just fly through these super quick. So there's a couple of other things that you can do to also help the lagoon. You can become Lagoon Loyal, which is an educational campaign by Brevard County, where it's encouraging residents to participate in lagoon positive actions, such as attending presentations like these. And each of the presentations that you attend, you get points towards coupons for that businesses in and around the lagoon are providing, and these can be things like 20% off of a massage, you know, 10% off of dinner, and really other great coupons and experiences like that. And so there's a lot of really great information. So check out lagoonloyal.com. We're still in the fertilizer ban from June 1st to September 30th. So we're on the last little bit. So please, no fertilizing. It is illegal to put out fertilizer that has nitrogen in it, and you cannot apply it within 10 feet of water. You are able to use other fertilizers, but it cannot have nitrogen in it. Grass clippings. Please make sure that you are putting your grass clippings back onto your yard as lawn fertilizer, or using it as mulch for garden beds, or composting it. Please, please, please do not blow them down the drain, as grass is great at sucking up nutrients. And if the grass goes down the drain, we're just throwing fertilizer into the lagoon. And so we definitely don't want that. Also, please hire responsible professionals, as they will divert mower chutes away from permeable surfaces and waterways, and they'll blow the grass clippings back onto the yard, and hopefully they will only use pesticides and fertilizers during times that they are allowed to, and when they are needed and not excessively doing so. We also please ask people to pick up after your pet. A lot of people are like, well, dog waste is natural, it should be fine just to leave it. But 100 tons of dog waste are left in the lagoon watershed every day, which is more than the space shuttle. And it's not just, natural nutrients that are found in dog waste. There's also harmful bacteria and possibly parasites. And if that gets into your regular water, it can enter the lagoon through stormwater. So please pick up after your pet. You can also plant Florida-friendly plants. Rockledge Gardens has a lot of great Florida-friendly plants, and they have a lot of information they can share with you. The Florida native plants are going to be better adapted for our Florida environment and a lot more low maintenance. And they'll also attract native plants, pollinators and butterflies. We also recommend to reduce your water use, so just simply watering the grass less. And if you need to water, please make sure that you're not watering the sidewalk or that you're using a spray nozzle. And as I mentioned before, please use a rain barrel. So those are a great way to help reduce your water usage and thus your stormwater issues as well. The Lagoon unites us all. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A or through the chat. And if you have already signed up for lagoonloyal.com, please take out your phones and make sure that you are in open browsing mode and scan this QR code so that you can get points towards your Lagoon Loyal profile so that you can get coupons from participating businesses. All right, cool. Does anybody have any questions? I will leave this up. Okay. All right. Shoot. Cool. All right. Any questions? I'll give it like maybe one more minute if anybody has any questions or any feedback. Was this useful? Did anybody learn anything? Was there something you wish that I had talked about more? Yes, the slideshow will be available to look at later. That'll probably take towards the end of next week. We will have it posted to our website, and then I will send a follow-up email with everyone who is registered so that people can check out the PDF as well. All right, well, cool. Well, thank you very much. I hope everybody learned things. I hope I didn't go through things too quickly. I know it is a lot of information, so I really appreciate everybody attending. Oh, okay. And so we just got a question which says, would you plant mangroves on Titusville waterfront if they ask? That is a great question for our Director of Restoration, this is Katie Savoya, and she can be reached at Katie. Here, I'll type it into the question. Katie at mrcirl.org. And she will be able to help evaluate the shoreline to make sure that it's a good one for restoration. And so I highly recommend, if you are interested in having your shoreline restored, or if you need to do any kind of mitigation, please email Katie at mrcirl.org. Okay. So if you have a personal pond, so the question is, do you not recommend using your personal pond for mangroves? If it's your personal pond and it's not owned by anybody else, like if, let's say you have a fish pond, I think that would be great to have a mangrove in your fish pond that's like in your backyard. But if it's like a community stormwater pond, then I definitely recommend do not plant a mangrove there, because that could be a violation of a permit, which would not be a good situation. Cool. All righty. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Like I said, I hope you learned a lot. And if you have any questions, feel free to email them to me as well. This is my email. So if you have any questions about the Marine Resources Council or rain barrels, other education programs, then shoot me an email and be happy to work with you. And so the next question is, I'm new to Florida. How do I find out what water source my pond is? I would definitely recommend talking to the Department of Natural Resources, Brevard County Department of Natural Resources, and they can direct you to the proper person to discuss with that because it could be a stormwater management pond. And so I would definitely recommend reaching out to them to get your question answered. Cool. Alrighty, well, thank you very much, everybody. Any last questions, comments, existential crises? All right. Well, thank you very much, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Please visit Rockledge Gardens. They have a phenomenal inventory of great plants, and especially native plants, and they'll have some of our mangroves there as well. Alrighty then. Well, thank you so much, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.